BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
I love it when we disappoint one of the world's best footballers. He's coming off in a huff because he's frustrated. He's frustrated because he didn't score and we kept a clean sheet. So it's always a good thing.
Hello and welcome to the Scottish Football Podcast. I'm Liam McLeod, and after waving farewell to a cranky Cristiano Ronaldo, Scotland's prepared to welcome Luka Modric and his Croatia side back to Hampden Park.
Kovacic squares it! And Luka Modric plants a right footer in the top corner and stabs a dagger into Scottish hearts.
Well, as ever with the national team, there are major questions for Steve Clarke to answer, not least where the goals might come from.
Dork still going, through ball, Dyke still, help to his right, he's found the helping Conway!
Yes!
And Tommy Conway puts
goal!
it in off the base of the right-hand post! Tommy Conway with his second! What a break! Ben Doak, magnificent!
We'll take a look at his attacking options and also find out what sort of opposition the Croats will be.
Croatia is very wobbly in terms of defensive transition, especially now that they've changed to a three in the back system. And that's something that's still an ongoing process and it leaves quite a lot of holes.
The Scottish Football Podcast.
Yes, we played Croatia just last month, so I think we know it's going to be a challenging fixture. I'm delighted to be joined by our chief sports writer, Tom English, and Scotland international Ryan Jack, who's of course currently playing with Esenler Erokspor in Turkey. Have I said that correctly, Ryan?
Yeah, that's correct.
How are you finding it?
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, I'm enjoying it. It's, as I touched on before, it's a big change. Obviously being at Rangers, living in Glasgow, obviously being at Rangers for the last 7 years. So yeah, to come away and obviously try something different. It's always been on the back of my mind that when I was going to be leaving Rangers, obviously had a big place in my heart, loved my time there, and I always thought that when I was leaving Rangers, I always had in the back of my mind that I'd like to try something new and maybe move away from it all and try something different. So I've done that, and yeah, it's completely different. Sort of the football's different, the culture's different. Obviously living in Istanbul, great city. So yeah, I'm just sort of taking it all in. I've only been here, I think it's 8 weeks now, or 9 weeks. So yeah, it's a big change.
Big kind of shift in mindset required, I'd say, Ryan, because what you're used to going into completely alien territory.
Yeah, completely. I think obviously when I first came over, the manager, he doesn't speak English, or very broken English. A lot of the coaching staff's the same. A lot of the Turkish players as well don't speak a lot of English. So for me, I was kind of the first couple of days, it was like just get my head around it all and try to communicate. And obviously I come home and I'm thinking, how am I going to get through this with communication and speaking to people? But credit to everyone at the club, they've made a big effort with me, and they've got me a translator. The coaching staff's obviously try to learn a bit of English with me, and so's the players. So yeah, look, it's all going well and I'm enjoying it, so hopefully that continues.
Yeah, it's important to have somebody alongside you who's able to help out. I know from previous examples of us going abroad to work in places like Moscow, you have to have a fixer with you who does all that, helps with the translations and takes you at the right restaurants, all that kind of thing, which is obviously very important. Listen, we've got much to discuss with Tom and Ryan. We're going to hear also from the Croatian journalist Juraj Vrdoljak as well. But let's get straight into it. Scotland against Croatia, match day 5 of Nations League A, Group 1. It's a 7:45 kickoff at Hampden. Of course, there's full coverage on Sportsound on BBC Radio Scotland. So, no wins yet in this campaign, Tom. It's a problem. It's not just no wins in this campaign. It's 1 win in 16. They're on their longest run of competitive matches without a victory ever. I just wonder what the mood's like in the camp just now. The performances have been pretty good in this campaign, I would say.
I would imagine the mood is okay, you know. Yeah, we get hung up on 1 win in 16. I'm not sure that they do, because if they get hung up on that, they'd go mad. So they can't allow themselves to wallow in 1 in 16. We can do it in the media. The performances in this Nations League have been decent. You know, they've late drama in all of the games, you know, so they've been competitive against very, very good sides. Now, it's deeply frustrating that they've only got 1 point out of it. But if you look at it cold-bloodedly, they've done okay in the games, and they've had injuries, and they've had decisions going against them. So, bizarrely, and kind of optimism isn't my natural state, as you well know. I'm actually feeling okay about this, even though it is, on paper, 1-16 is horrific. But I'm feeling all right about Steve Clarke and this team.
Yeah, I mean, there are other kind of tales being woven through these two matches that Scotland face in this double header at the end of this section, at home to Croatia and then a trip to Warsaw to play Poland, because the pot that they will be in for the World Cup qualifiers rests on what happens in these next two games. We maybe touch on that a little bit later, but Ryan, you've been in and around the squad very recently, obviously at the European Championship in the summer. Have you spoken to the guys about this current run? I mean, you were on a bad run going into that tournament. How is that on the mind of the players, do you think?
Yeah, look, I've obviously been involved in the summer, and then I still keep in touch with quite a lot of the players that are still involved. But for me, it's obviously, over the summer we were bitterly disappointed. I think there's no getting away from it, not just on the results but on the performances, and maybe a bit of regret not really thinking that we showed kind of what we showed in the qualifying campaign, which was so good and good football, good to watch. And I think when we went to the tournament, we kind of never showed that, so that there was a big frustration there. Obviously, I've not been back involved since then, but obviously I always watch the games, always watch how the team's getting on, and there's no doubt, even going into these two games, I know Steve Clarke well, and I'm sure he'll be telling the squad that, look, these are two games that we can go and win. I think, as Tom touched on there, performances have actually been quite good and been good to watch. It's been exciting games. Maybe in a lot of the games it's been sort of one mistake or someone doesn't match a runner, and you get punished. And I think everyone's touched on it at this level, when you play sort of the higher nations, then they punish you as soon as you make that mistake, or if you don't match that runner, or if you don't stay switched on at all times. So, but for me, I think on the performances, it's been very good. And these next two games, I'm sure the coaching staff will be drilling into the players that it's two that they can go and win.
You're looking at Liam and Ryan. It's 16 games for sure. But really, and I've said this before, it's really only one game. It's Hungary. If they'd gone out and won that game, none of the rest of the other games, the defeats would matter, because they'd have got through to the playoffs and then taken their chances there. It was the fact that against Hungary, the performance was so negative, so lacking in creativity and ambition. And I think the Tartan Army will not forgive Steve Clarke for that, because they were there in their millions in Germany. They won't forgive him until he does something pretty special. That one defeat is following him around more than any other.
Yeah, but as you rightly said, the performance level has definitely increased. I don't know if it's got anything to do with the change in shape. Obviously, he's been forced into a back four, Ryan, because your old teammate Kieran Tierney's been out, and it's forced him to change the shape. And the game in Zagreb, they were very unlucky. It looked like they equalised right at the end. Shea Adams scored a goal. It was VAR'd, unfortunately. But they've certainly proven over the course of these 4 games, well, 3.5 really, because the first half against Poland was a hangover from the Hungary game Tom's talking about. They've shown enough to suggest that they can get a victory in this match on Friday, haven't they? Yeah,
you've hit the nail on the head there. I think for me, if performances since the Euros had been sort of lacklustre, and it was heavy defeats, and there was a lot of change in the squad, and I think maybe we'd be sitting asking different questions, of course, but I don't think that's the case. I think since the Euros, I'm sure the manager and the staff went away, reflected heavily on how that went, and then I'm sure there's players, because there's no doubt I did when you left, you sort of look back and you think, what could have we done different? What could have players done different? There's all sorts does go through your head. So I'm sure everyone's reflected, and then I'm sure when they've met up again in the squad after that, it's been a case of, right, let's discuss it, let's park it, and this is how we're going to go moving forward. And I think the manager's very good at that, and he's very strong-minded, that he's strong at addressing what goes wrong, and he was the same in the Euros. Straight after the Germany game, he addressed it. Same with the game after. But yeah, he's strong with that as soon as it's done, you move on, and this is how he thinks that the squad can move forward and start getting better results. Obviously, the results haven't really came after Euros, but I definitely think performances have.
Yeah, John Carver was speaking to the media just the other day and talking about how important it is that a lot of these guys who missed the last camp, and maybe even the camp before that as well, have returned to the fray. Scott McKenna and John McGinn, Jack Henry's back for the first time since the summer. Tom, how important is it to have these guys back in? And do you expect the likes of McGinn to, given he's been such a talisman, to come straight back into the side, given the very impressive performances of both Kenny McLean and Ben Doak last month?
Yeah, well, that's. I was thinking about that last night. It's interesting. Look, first of all, it's critically important that you get these characters, big personalities, back in the squad. Optimism, energy, experience, very important. So this squad looks a lot better than the last one, So that's good. The shape of the team, the personnel in the team, it's intriguing because I think he has to start Doak. It's energy, it's pace, it's fearlessness. I think the Tartan Army would be very disappointed if Doak doesn't start this game, given he's been good so far. I think Gilmore and McLean was very good the last day. He's been good every time he's played in this campaign.
Well, the assist in Lisbon for McTominay's header was outstanding. Yeah. I mean, Ryan knows all about what Kenny McLean can do. Having played with him at club and national level. Yeah, I
think he's got it. I think Gilmore, if it's a 4 and a 2, I think Gilmore and McLean are your 2, aren't they? I mean, I don't think Kenny McLean has done anything to remove himself from this team. It's what's above that. Obviously, McTominay's going to play behind a striker because he's in amazing form. I think Doak plays. So then who's...
McGinn or Christie, isn't it?
Yeah, McGinn or Christie
as well.
Yeah, McGinn or Christie. Gold probably off the bench. And then there's going to be a striker, whoever that might be. You know what I'd like to see? And Steve Clarke he doesn't like surprises, right? Does not like surprises. But I'd like to see if it's... Because the 3 strikers... They're not prolific. Shankland's not scoring. Dykes is not scoring. Dykes is hardly starting. Tommy Conway
is out, yeah.
Adams is out. Conway, okay, he's got 5 goals and 11 in a championship. He's your form striker.
He's the only one that's scoring goals just now. Really.
He is. And I think on form, Conway is a striker. I don't think he will be, but on form, he's a striker. Is there any merit in trying to convert one of the midfielders into a striker?
It's funny,
is there any possibility that Clarke will do that?
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned this on air before as well, but I was talking on another podcast yesterday, and maybe Ryan can answer this. I just wonder if there's value in playing Scott McTominay as a centre forward, given how brilliant his finishing is. And we saw another great example of it against Inter at the weekend there, who are the current champions in Italy. His Napoli team went there, got a draw. He scored the goal. Now, Dykes does a great job up there. He might not have scored a goal for Scotland for a while, but he brings others into play. I mean, a lot of John McGinn's international goals have come off the back of Lyndon Dykes' hold-up plays, flick-ons. What do you think, Ryan? Is that a potential curveball, McTominay up front?
Yeah, it's a curveball, all right. But for me, I don't think he would play Scott up front, but obviously, you never know. Like, Scott's got great legs, great energy. We've seen that for Scotland. You're seeing that at Man United. You're now seeing it in Napoli. That's sort of Scott's game. He can break from midfield. He's got that power. He's a powerful runner. But as you touch on there, Shanks hasn't really been scoring. Dykes not been playing. And then Tommy, as you touched on, is the informed striker. Shea obviously pulls out, who's playing in the Serie A. But the thing is, for me, even when you're discussing the Scotland sort of lineup now, there's always debates. There could be maybe 2 or 3 players. So that just shows that the squad is strong, and the manager does have great options to maybe chop and change. And as Tom touched on, he doesn't really like to throw anything surprising out there, because I think the manager throughout his time, even I've experienced that if you do well for him, then he trusts you and he'll believe in you and he'll back you. So another one I was thinking was maybe Ben Doak. I don't know if he's played through the middle much, but obviously you can see straight away that he's got pace to threaten him behind. So I don't know if he's one that maybe they could try and train in and see how that looks.
As usual, we're going to have this debate, Tom, on the radio in the build-up to the match. You'll be discussing it, and it'll be Lyndon Dykes will be up front, John McGinn will be in for Doak, and it'll be back to what it was. Sorry, you were away to say something.
No, I think you're dead right. I think we are going to talk about it. Ryan Christie's another one. Could Christie play through the middle? I suspect he could.
He's been playing deeper for his club, hasn't he? The last
he has. He's been playing. Last season he played deeper. This season I think he's playing more further forward. But I think he's a very versatile player, Kristen. You know, and I think he could adapt. But this is, as you say, Liam, we will have this debate right up until you announce the teams, and it will be Linda Dykes up front.
Well, let's look at other parts of the team before we move on to the Croatians and perhaps the bigger picture that's going to come from these two games. I'm just looking at obviously Craig Gordon's going to start. He's brought Kieran Slicker in, plays for Ipswich, came through at Manchester City. With Angus Gunn out injured just now as well, it's clearly a problem position. I think it was always going to be a problem position when you had Craig Gordon, Alan McGregor and David Marshall as your three, goalkeeper choices for 15 years, as it was, best part of 2 decades actually for Craig Gordon's 2 decades in the national team. It's ludicrous. And then you look at the defence. Grant Hanley's still barely playing. Anthony Ralston's still barely playing. Nicky Devlin is Player of the Month for October in the Scottish Premiership. Been playing really well with Aberdeen. But Ralston, I don't think Tom did himself any harm at all in his performances in certainly the games last month, but probably the campaign as a whole. Good recovery from the Euros. Yeah,
I think he's a player who is doing a really, really hard job for Scotland in that he is not starting for Celtic, and yet he's coming into a Scotland team and playing against absolutely stellar opposition. You look at the teams that he's played against since he came into the team, and they're tough sides, some of the best sides in Europe. And I think he's, for a player who's I don't think he's that like international class, Anthony Ralston, but he's doing really, really well. And he cannot be impervious to the kind of the flack that he gets. Some of that must get to him. The bombardment of negativity, and yet he keeps coming. He's a robust character. I admire him a lot for what he's done.
Do you remember him? I think he was 17. Was he 17 or 18 when he went up against Neymar in the Champions League? Brendan Rodgers in his first spell put him in there as a teenager, and he got stuck into him. I mean, at the time, Neymar was probably in his pomp.
Neymar was in his pomp, and Neymar was magnificent. But Ralston was like a little Rottweiler. Yeah. He was just snarling and biting away at him.
Is that the kind of character he is, Ryan? Because you were with him in the summer.
Yeah, definitely. I think even attitude-wise in training, he's always asking questions, always wants to learn. And as Tom touched on, he's not playing, obviously, a lot of minutes for Celtic, getting a lot of game time. So credit to him when he does come, and especially the last camp, and he puts in that type of performance, because we all know as players when you're not playing consistently and then all of a sudden you get thrown into a big game and a pressure game where the country's not exactly flying high and winning games, he still turns up and still goes in and puts a performance on. So he is that type of character. He's very robust and determined, and he has that traits that when he does go on the pitch, he's someone that when he's alongside you can trust, and he'll give 100%.
So assuming it's Ralston and Robertson as the fullbacks, who's your middle two there, Tom? Because last month, again, it was Suter and Hanley, both equipped themselves pretty well. Scott McKenna's back in the reckoning now too, and the one thing I would say is Suter and McKenna came through the under-21s together. I think Suter was the captain for a lot of that time, so they know each other very well. They're from a similar part of the country too, so they go back a long way. But as Hanley, who's not been playing too often, done enough to stay in the team. I know Steve Clarke obviously really likes him.
I suspect he probably has done enough in Steve Clarke's eyes to stay in the team. I would go Suter McKenna, because Hanley's like, it's incredible. The fact that he's played virtually no minutes. I mean, it's just, I think he's played 15 minutes since the last international window. But I don't think that's going to bother Steve Clarke, because playing regularly doesn't seem to be much of an issue for Grant Hanley. He can just slot back in and do a decent job for Scotland. But I would be much more comfortable to see Suter and McKenna there. Two guys having good seasons, playing all the time.
Would you do that, Ryan?
Yeah, I think that obviously does make sense. I think, especially for the balance of the team, if you put Scott left centre-half, then it means you've got a left-sided player on that side. And as you touched on, they've played together, they know each other very well. I think off the pitch as well, they're very close. So yeah, it does make sense. And then obviously you've got Ryan Porteous as well, who's playing at Watford, but obviously since the summer, maybe he's found it tough to get back in. And then obviously Jack Hendry's been out injured, so I think it's probably the obvious pairing for me.
Well, we shall see, and we will bring you the debate that Tom will be heavily invested in on the radio before we get the official team news. Let's have a look at Croatia then. We do have very recent experience of them, obviously. They've had the upper hand on Scotland in the most recent couple of meetings, including at the delayed Euro 2020 finals when they were last at Hampden. They won 3-1 on that occasion. Let's find out a bit more about them with Croatian journalist Juraj Vrdoljak. Right, Juraj, obviously these two teams went head-to-head in Zagreb last month, so they'll know plenty about each other. Probably won't be too many surprises, but will there be anything different for Scotland to expect from this game, Croatia away from home, compared to last month?
Well, yes, the last time we spoke about a month ago, you were quite surprised when I mentioned that Scotland has a chance in Zagreb, that the difference in form should not just suggest that Scotland is out of any chance to get something out of it. It was a dramatic VAR last minute the save for Croatia. As far as Croatia go, in between that game, we played Poland away, which was also a very dramatic game. It was a 3-3 draw after Croatia overturned a 1-0 deficit and then went up 3-1 and then managed to concede twice. So that suggests something that you might have noticed in Zagreb and something we already spoke about, how Croatia is very wobbly in terms of defensive transition, especially now that they've changed to a 3-in-the-back system. And that's something that's still an ongoing process, and it leaves quite a lot of holes as far as defensive record goes. But also, Croatia is very good individually, and it takes only one or two situations where the individual quality can overturn the game. Scotland saw it, Poland saw it, so that's what we might expect in this game as well. But there are issues with the squad. So Croatia will be going to Scotland without the first choice goalkeeper, which is Dominik Livakovic. He earned a dramatic also red card for his bad tackle on Robert Lewandowski. So it's likely that Nedeljko Labrovic, the second choice goalkeeper from Augsburg, will jump in, which he's not very accustomed. He doesn't have much caps with him. Also, we're traveling with two strikers. We have quite a lot of issues in that area as well. Kramaric and Matanovic will once again be joined up in front. And now there's a return of Mateo Kovacic. So that's kind of what's different for Croatia from that first game in Zagreb.
Yeah, I think we were all very excited with our own Ben Doak's performance against Josko Gvardiol, who is obviously a very expensive defender, one of the best in the world. And I think he struggled at times against Ben Doak. But I mean, you're right to mention the area up front there, because it's been difficult for Croatia to replace the presence and the goals of Mario Mandzukic, hasn't it? And what I would say is, having watched Croatia, Igor Matanovic has got every chance. There's a youngster scored the goal against Scotland, the first Croatia goal. And in Baturina, you've got Martin Baturina, you've got a fabulous talent there as well, another 21-year-old. So for some reason, Croatia just seem to be able to bring through these young players on a regular basis to replace the ones who've retired and gone.
Yeah, I'd add in Petar Sučić, who's also had a brilliant game. Celtic fans will once again meet them soon enough when Dinamo Zagreb and Celtic cross paths in the Champions League. So Baturina and Sučić are the gems of Dinamo Zagreb's academy. I'd also put in Luka Sučić, Petar's cousin, who's now doing brilliantly in Real Sociedad. He might be joining Baturina up as a double 10 in a formation behind a sole striker. We'll see what Dalic will tinker for this game, but we do have a lot of midfield talent, and in the back you mentioned Josko Gvardiol, who's now already a very well established world-class defender, but still the names themselves don't do much unless they perform on the pitch. And against Scotland we could see that you mentioned the situation with Gvardiol as well, and Doak giving him a hard time. But yes, it is true that Croatia is bringing in talent, and that's why I'm not really sure I understand Dalic's obsession with the senior players. He likes to keep them as long as he can on the squad. I mean, There's only one Luka Modric, obviously, but he's still going strong, aged almost 40 now. But apart from that, that's kind of an issue for Croatia because we do like, especially Zlatko Dalic in his tenure, he likes to be very reliant on the people he's made this big success with. So that's one of the reasons why Ivan Perisic is still in the squad, despite him not being full himself and quite aging after the bad injury. So, there's always that mixture of the young incoming talent and the old squad that's still very close to Dalic, and he's very close to them.
Yeah, I mean, the phrase we would use here is, I suppose, despite a disappointing Euros, Dalic has built up a lot of credit in the bank, given the success that he's had as Croatia head coach. And by the way, if you've not seen it yet, and I know you will have seen it, Juraj, probably one of the best goals I've seen this season was Luka Sucic scoring for Real Sociedad against Atletico Madrid. I think it was his first goal in La Liga. It was an extraordinary goal. Fabulous finish from outside the box. So he's going to be a massive danger. I just wonder what you guys put in the water in Croatia, because you have a smaller population than Scotland, yet you are continually fighting in major tournaments. In World Cups, you're reaching the semis last time, the final the time before that. What's the success story been built on in Croatia over the last 30 years since independence? What has been the big thing? Is it simply just young players being given the opportunity to play, say, 100 games at club level, whether that's with Hajduk or Dinamo or whoever, Osijek? Is this the pathway that's made it possible for Croatia to be so successful?
If I had a clear-cut answer on that, I would probably be a millionaire by now, because every time I get those questions and no one really can point a finger and said, like, that's the main reason. The facilities in Croatia are still quite bad. We spoke briefly about your visit to Maksimir Stadium, and that's the biggest stadium in the country. The facilities generally are very bad, but the work they do with talents in the clubs, it is very, very good on the other hand, but still not as good to point a finger and say that's the main reason why we produce so many talents. I'd say the main reason is a lot of those young talents from the domestic league leave Croatia quite early and go to the big clubs, which are always keeping an eye out for potential new talents in Croatia. So they're bringing them in to the clubs that they obviously have world-class facilities, quite young, so they form them in those facilities, and we kind of get the benefits in terms of the national team. Also, a lot of young players, like we spoke about Matanovic, Luka Sucic, they've been raised in different cultures. Luka Sucic was born in Austria. He's Austrian, basically. He's an Austrian Croatian, so he never got a chance to even play in Croatia, to go through the youth system, youth ranks in Croatia, Matanovic as well. So diaspora, the Croatians abroad, they kind of have the opportunity to make their ranks through world-class facilities such as Red Bull Salzburg or Eintracht Frankfurt or whatever you want. So that's kind of the combination of the closest you can get to making a recipe for why we produce so much young talent.
I want to ask you about the fact that Scotland, to somehow go above Croatia by the end of this group, they're going to have to win by 2 goals, at least, given the head-to-head, and hope that Portugal win the other 2 games. And Scotland then have to go to Warsaw and win as well. And as you know, having watched Croatia there last month, that's going to be a difficult thing to do. The problem for Scotland, I suppose, is Croatia don't lose by 2 goals terribly often, and the only teams to do it really are the big sides. Spain beat them 3-0 at the Euros there. You got to go back to the World Cup game against Argentina to find another one. Those 2 were 3-0. Does this Croatia team come to Scotland and lose by 2 goals, do you think?
On one hand, I don't see them losing by 2 goals, but I could see another repeat of the game we saw in Zagreb or the game we saw in Warsaw, Croatian game. So it was quite a long time since we saw Croatia conceding, 5 goals, if we would include that VAR situation in the dying minutes. But it's rarely does Croatia concede so many goals, and that can be linked to the thing I mentioned, the transition to back 3 and the inconsistent formation. So you don't have consistent group of players that start. The starting 11 is not consistent because of the injuries, because of the suspensions, because of the even some players not being given playing time in their own clubs. So Dalic has a lot of issues with that process of transitioning to a back three. And one of the circumstances is a lot of goals conceded. So I think we're gonna see both teams score. I think Scotland will score again because they've shown that in Zagreb they can be an offensive threat. But I would say it's unlikely that Croatia won't score at least one. So that will make Scotland's work quite harder.
That's not what I wanted to hear, Juraj. I didn't want to hear that. Anyway, listen, thank you so much.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
Croatian journalist Juraj Vrdoljak there. I don't think he's the same kind of character, so I don't think we'll be expecting Luka Modric to storm about Hampden in a huff like Ronaldo did last month. But Ryan, we have seen over the course of the last, since their independence really, we have seen superb Croatian teams punching above their weight, smaller population than Scotland has, yet they've reached a World Cup final. They were in the last four the last time around. They've more trouble with the European Championship for some reason. But under Zlatko Dalic, they've been magnificent. And in Modric, you've got this guy who just keeps on going. I remember when the draw was made, I thought, Modric, Ronaldo and Lewandowski will have chucked it by this point. All still there, all still playing at really high levels. What kind of game are you expecting here and how difficult is it going to be?
Yeah, like as you touched on there, I think Luka Modric, for me, incredible. What an incredible player. I think sitting at Hampden in the last Euros and watching him put one in the top corner outside of his foot, and even the way he played that day, it was like this guy, I don't even know what age he was then, but still an older player, and you just look at his career and think, wow, like what a player.
It's astonishing.
I actually remember when I played with Borna at Rangers, and obviously Borna was in the Croatia squad at the time. I used to always say to Borna, like, what's Modric like in training? Like, what's he like off the pitch? Like, what does he eat? Just sort of try and pick his brains, because I'm like, this guy just, like, every time you watch him, he's just 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 at the highest level. So for me, it's a tough game, obviously, as you touched on, top side, top players, but I think the way Scotland are performing, obviously results-wise, not been great, but the way we're performing, I think I touched on before, Steve Clarke will be coming into this camp and putting that belief into the players that if we can match that performance and maybe be a bit more clinical at the top end, then it's definitely 3 points will definitely be there for us.
Before we go, because the time has raced away from us, I can't believe it, but I wanted to, and I hinted about this earlier on, talking about the repercussions of these two matches. Scotland could be anywhere between pot 1 and pot 3 for the World Cup qualifiers, which the draw for which is made in a month's time in Switzerland. To get to pot 1, which would be an extraordinary result, given the form and given the start to this campaign, given they've got 1 point from 4 games. If they can win these two, and in order for pot 1 to be achievable, they need to beat Croatia by 2 goals, which they've done before at Hampden. Remember Snodgrass and Naismith in 2013. It's happened before. Very difficult though. So they need to win that one by 2 goals. They then need to beat Poland. They then need to hope Portugal win the 2 other games. We're back to doing this. Remember how lovely it was during the Euro campaign there? We didn't have to worry about any of these permutations. We're back to this now, unfortunately. Pot 2 is unlikely because you are looking at the teams. They are the likes of Norway and Greece and Slovakia and Romania. Norway are the ones that you could potentially catch. And when I say catch, I'm talking about the FIFA World Rankings here. Scotland currently 51st. They're 25th in Europe. You need to be in the top 24 to be in the top 2 pots, albeit pot 1 is going to be full of teams that are finishing the top 2 of their Nations League groups. The rest of it's going to be determined by the FIFA rankings. So you need to go above Norway in the rankings somehow over the course of this international double-header, which means Norway, if they win their 2 games, doesn't matter what Scotland do, you won't be getting into pot 2. But if they lose to Slovenia, and by the time this podcast goes out, we'll know if that's happened. If they've lost, great. If they haven't, then it rolls over to their home game against Kazakhstan. They're playing in League B. Unfortunately, it's most likely going to be pot 3 for Scotland, which means they're going to have a top-tier side as pot 1, and pot 2, you're going to have much more challenging opposition. Ukraine, for example, Turkey instead of North Macedonia and Northern Ireland, albeit Northern Ireland beat Scotland last time they played. So again, if you're able to keep up with all that, Tom, it just shows you again how important these two matches are, starting on Friday night.
Yeah, they are. But even if they win both of them, which is a huge Herculean task, there's still no guarantees about rising up the pots. So it looks like pot 3, right? That looks like a fait accompli, and you just got to suck it up.
If you can finish in the top 2 in this group, you're in pot 1, and that's still achievable with 7 points. So Scotland win the 2. However, because it goes to the head-to-head tiebreaker, they need to win by 2 goals because Croatia won by 1 against Scotland in Zagreb.
And I think people have just got their heads in the Nations League, but you're right to point out the ramifications, the repercussions of the Nations League, because very quickly, once the draw is made, people are going to start thinking about why were Scotland in pot 3, and then all of that stuff that you just outlined is going to come into view for a lot of Scotland fans. So it's in the here and now. These games are very, very important. But I just think, for me, I think that the ship has sailed in terms of trying to get into pot 2, isn't it? Do you think? What's your assessment of it?
Pot 2's probably it's potentially less likely than pot 1, bizarrely. It's just the way it's working out. And look, we could actually do another separate podcast about this, but we don't have any time. That's the bottom line. But the fact is that Scotland are looking at potentially playing Nations League games in March. If you get into the top 2 and pot 1 in the World Cup draw, then you're playing in the Nations League quarterfinals in March. If you finish 3rd and above Poland, you're playing in promotion relegation playoffs. The World Cup qualifying campaign is so different, convoluted this time, primarily because they're squeezing more Nations League games in. But anyway, forget all that. Quickly, Tom, quick.
Final, if they win the next 2 games, then I don't think pot 1, 2 or 3 is going to matter that much, because Scotland will have got their mojo back and they'll feel ready. They'll feel ready for any group. If they win these next 2, they'll be hot to trot.
Very quickly, Ryan, you still hope to add to your cap haul?
Look, I spoke to Steve at the back end of the summer before I came out here, and I just said, look, like obviously at the time I was trying to get a club, I was staying fit. I just said to him, look, I want to get back playing, get a club, get back playing, start playing consistent, start enjoying my football again, and hopefully, touch wood, stay injury free and see where it takes me. And he was on the same page. He just said, look, you don't need to close the door or do anything rash at the minute. Just get back playing, see where you're at. So for me, it's one of the ones. I'll never shut the door. I'll never come out and I'm officially retiring or anything like that. And if I'm ever needed, then I'd have the conversation. But for now, I think for me, it's just focusing on playing every week, playing as consistent as I can, try and help the club that I'm at, and then down the line, if that brings me anything else, then we'll see where that goes.
Good stuff. My thanks to Ryan Jack, Tom English, Juraj Vrdoljak for joining us earlier on to give us the lowdown on Croatia. You may not be able to see the game on a linear broadcaster, but you can, of course, hear it in its entirety. Scotland-Croatia, BBC Radio Scotland with Sports Sound this evening, on air from 6, extensive coverage and live updates on the BBC Sports Scotland website and the mobile app too. See you for the game.
The Scotland Rugby Podcast is now available every Tuesday. Join me, Andy Burke and Tom English. Just head to BBC Sounds and subscribe to the Scotland Rugby Podcast.
It's just seismic stuff.
There's bucket hats as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is this a rugby podcast or is this a fashion podcast?
Why can't it be a bit of both?
Rugby. Let's get on to rugby.
There's a lot to be excited about.
Today's guest, John McGuigan.
Clubs are at the absolute bedrock of everything Scottish rugby's about.
The Rugby Sports Sound Podcast from BBC Radio Scotland.
You cannot help but be so excited.
It's going to be the centre of the rugby universe.
BBC Sounds.